All right, good morning. How's everyone doing today? All
All
right.
right.
Today we are going to read through chapter 8 of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. In the previous chapter, they were visiting the reservation where the savages lived. And by savages, they mean people who live like we do now. They have babies biologically instead of growing them in test tubes, and they live, I guess, in a way similar to the way that we live now, maybe a little bit more primitive. But I think that's the main thing they mean by savages. And they discover one of their own living among the savages. She was lost and forgotten a few decades ago. She has a child, a natural born child, which she thinks is disgusting. And she's disgusting. They're disgusted by her. So, well, let's see what happens in chapter 8. Now, if this is your first time watching, we're doing this live, and if you're watching live, then I encourage you to ask questions, because that's the whole point of this. We're not just reading through the chapter, we're stopping and we're talking about different words and phrases that maybe you don't understand. So we're kind of exploring vocabulary here. And it's much better if you make comments and ask questions as I'm reading. That makes it more interesting, because if you don't, I will just stop when I think you don't know a word or when I think I have to explain a phrase. Maybe sometimes I won't stop. So it's better if you ask questions. All right, well, let's get started with chapter 8 of Brave New World. Outside in the dust among the garbage, there were 4 dogs now. Bernard and John were walking slowly up and down. "So hard for me to realize," Bernard was saying, "to reconstruct as though we were living on a different planets, in different centuries. A mother and all this dirt, and gods and old age and disease." He shook his head. "It's almost inconceivable." When you say that something is inconceivable, it means, in a way, very simply, it just means like I can't imagine it. It's impossible to imagine. That's not really what it means, but that's close enough. "It's almost inconceivable. I shall never understand unless you can explain." "Explain what?" "This." He indicated the pueblo. If you indicate something, that could be like gesturing, moving your hand like this, and then well, pointing. Where's the camera? Pointing. Or it could mean this. You could indicate with your, maybe with your head. That it was a little house outside the village. He's probably pointing to things, but you could indicate with your head this, that. "And it was a little house outside the village. Everything, all your life. But what is there to say? From the beginning, as far back as you can remember, as far back as I can remember." John frowned. There was a long silence. "It was very hot. They had eaten a lot of tortillas and sweet corn." Seems like, well, they are in New Mexico, but they are making a lot of reference to, I think, Mexican ingredients of food or Mexican food. Tortillas are mostly a Mexican type of food, but I guess they use them in other countries too, in Latin America. "Come and lie down, baby." They lay down together in the big bed. "Sing." And Linda sang "Streptocock G to Banbury tea, and bye bye baby Banting. Soon you'll be, soon you'll need decanting." Her voice got fainter and fainter. There was a loud noise, and he woke with a start. And we've seen that many times in all of the books that I've been reading. I never realized what a common word this word start was. Of course, you know start to mean beginning. But if you think about the word startled, which means shocked or surprised, start obviously has another meaning, and that is to be very surprised. So if you start, that means when you're very shocked and you move. Did you ever have that experience where you're trying not to sleep and suddenly you go like that? That's a start. So let's see. There was a loud noise, and he woke with a start. So he was sleeping, and then the loud noise happened, and then he woke up in a very quick, shocking way. A man was standing by the bed, enormous, frightening. He was saying something to Linda, and Linda was laughing. She had pulled the blanket up to her chin. So she pulled her blanket up like this. But the man pulled it down again. His hair was like two black ropes. And round his arm was a lovely silver bracelet with blue stones in it. He liked the bracelet, but all the same, he was frightened. He hid his face against Linda's body. Linda put her hand on him, and he felt safer. In those other words, he did not understand so well, she said to the man, "Not with John here." The man looked at him, then again at Linda, and said a few words in a soft voice. Linda said no. But the man bent over the bed towards him, and his face was huge, terrible. The black ropes of hair touched the blanket. "No," Linda said again, and he felt her hand squeezing more tightly. So he's squeezing. He felt her hand. Oh, so she's squeezing, I think, her son. I think maybe she's scared or nervous. "No, no," but the man took hold of one of his arms, and it hurt. He screamed. The man put his other hand and lifted him up. Linda was still holding him, still saying, "No, no." The man said something short and angry, and suddenly her hands were gone. "Linda, Linda," he kicked and wriggled. Wriggling is moving like this. So he was kicking and wriggling. But the man carried him across the door, opened it, put him down on the floor in the middle of the other room, and went away, shutting the door behind him. This makes it sound like he's a little boy, but I thought in the previous chapter they described him as being around 16 or 18. Maybe I've got my times mixed up. So she put him down on the floor, or he put him down on the floor in the middle of the other room and went away, shutting the door behind him. He got up and ran to the door. Standing on tiptoe, he could just reach the big wooden latch. We better take a look at the word latch. We've had that word before, but I never know who's watching. So maybe these are new people. Latches are something like this. Whoops. Why isn't this showing up? Oh. Let me try that again. These are latches. Whoops. I'm having a difficult morning. So they're kind of way to close the door, and they could come in different varieties, but they're all latches. Okay. Shutting the door behind him, he got up and ran to the door. Standing on tiptoe, he could just reach the wooden latch. So this must be a little boy. I thought he was a teenager. I thought he was like 15 or 16, but it sounds like he's more 4 or 5 or something like that. He lifted it and pushed, but the door wouldn't open. "Linda!" he shouted. She didn't answer. He remembered a huge room, rather dark, and there were big wooden things with strings fastened to them, and lots of women standing round them, making blankets, Linda said. Linda told him to sit in the corner with the other children, while she went and helped the women. I have no idea what's going on anymore. In the last chapter, it seemed like I think Linda, that's the forgotten beta woman. So that's she's in the higher caste of this society, but she got left behind into the savage reservation and had to live there. And while she was there, she had a son, the natural way, which she's very ashamed of. And I thought that he was like 16 or 18 or something in that chapter. And she was explaining the whole story of what happened to her, to these visitors, these tourists. But now it seems like her son is a little boy and they're describing a different scene. That's how it seems to me, because suddenly they're talking about all these women, and I don't know what's going on. Well, I guess maybe we'll figure it out as we go. So while she went and helped the women, he played with the little boys for a long time. Suddenly, people started talking very loud, and there were the women pushing Linda away, and Linda was crying. She went to the door, and he ran after her. He asked her why they were angry. "Because I broke something," she said, and then she got angry too. "How should I know how to do their beastly weaving?" she said. "Beastly savages." He asked her what savages were. When they got back to the house, Popeye was waiting at the door, and he came in with them. He had a big gourd full of stuff that looked like water. Only it wasn't water. Well, a gourd is a type of vegetable. Well, I guess it's not a vegetable, it's a gourd. It's a type of plant. But I think, see, you can turn these into containers or something to hold things. I think that's something they used to do. And so when it says that he had a big gourd full of something, it means that he had a container like this. And then they're talking about what's inside of it. So let's see, what does he have? He had a big gourd full of stuff that looked like, Furry Boris says, "Hi there. Hi, Furry Boris. How are you? How's everything in Vancouver?" Right? Vancouver. He had a big gourd full of stuff that looked like water. Only it wasn't water, but something with a bad smell that burnt your mouth and made you cough. Linda drank some, and Popeye drank some, and then Linda laughed a lot and talked very loud. And when she and Popeye went into the other room, when Popeye went away, he went into the room. Linda was in the bed, and so fast asleep that he couldn't wake her. Popeye used to come often, he said, and the stuff in the gourd was called mezcal. So mezcal is, I don't know if you know what tequila is. That's a very famous drink, a very famous Mexican drink, actually. And mezcal is something kind of similar to tequila. Probably Mexicans would get angry with me if I say that they're similar, but I think that they're similar. Although I think I like mezcal better. I think mezcal has a more interesting taste than tequila. Smoky. But Linda said it ought to be called soma. So remember that soma is a drug that they take in their society so that they don't feel pain or uncomfortable or any kind of uncomfortable feelings. So Linda is comparing mezcal to soma. Or that's how she understands mezcal to be, because it's an alcohol. Only it made you feel ill afterwards. So if you take soma, you don't feel sick the next day. But if you drink a lot of mezcal, you'll certainly be sick. Fari Borges says tequila is very strong. So is mezcal. But when they talk about, if you're familiar with tequila, they always talk about the worm in the tequila. That's really mezcal, I think. I mean, mostly when you have the worm, that usually means, let's see, mezcal worm. So they get them confused because they're kind of similar. I don't know if they come from the same plant or what. But you see, they put a worm. They put a worm in the drink. Usually in the bottle, like this, there's a worm. Which I guess seems disgusting, but I really, actually, I like mezcal. I think it's good. You should try it if you like that sort of thing. Linda drank some and Pope drank some, and then Linda laughed a lot and they talked very loud. And when she and Pope went into the other room, when Pope went away, he went into the room. Linda was in the bed, so fast asleep that he couldn't wake her. Pope used to come often. He said the stuff in the gourd was called mezcal, but Linda said it ought to be called soma. Only it made you feel ill afterwards. He hated Pope. He hated them all of them who came to see Linda. One afternoon, when he had been playing with other children, it was cold. He remembered, and there was snow on the mountains. He came back to the house and heard angry voices in the room. They were women's voices. And they said words he didn't understand, but he knew that they were dreadful words. Dreadful means horrible. He knew that that's a pretty common word, dreadful. Then suddenly, crash, something was upset. He heard people moving about quickly, and there was another crash, and then a noise like hitting a mule, only not so bony. So let's take a look. In case you don't know what a mule is, let's take a look at that word. Here's a mule. I don't know what the difference is between, for example, a donkey and a mule. They kind of look the same to me. But I guess donkeys are worse. That's a mule. There was another crash, and then a noise like hitting a mule, only not so bony. And then Linda screamed, "Oh, don't, don't, don't!" She said. He ran in. There were 3 women in dark blankets. Linda was on the bed. One of the women was holding her wrists. Another was lying across her legs, so she couldn't kick. A third was hitting her with a whip. Once, twice, 3 times, and each time Linda screamed, crying. He tugged. Tugging is when you pull something like this. Usually it's like tugging at clothes. This is tugging. Tug is like pull. Crying, he tugged at the fringe of the woman's blanket. Please, please, with her free hand, she held him away. The whip came down again. The whip came down again and again, and Linda screamed. He caught hold of the woman's enormous brown hand between his own, and a bit with all his might. She cried out, wrenched her hand free, and gave him such a push that he fell down. While he was lying on the ground, she hit him 3 times with the whip. It hurt more than anything he had ever felt. Like fire, the whip whistled again, fell. But this time it was Linda who screamed. "But why do they want to hurt you, Linda?" he asked that night. He was crying because the red marks of the whip on his back still hurt so terribly. But he was also crying because people were so beastly and unfair. Fringe. Let's go back. Fari Borges is saying fringe of what? Fringe of what? Let's see. Where was that? Okay, it says crying. Fringe means like edge. But when you're talking about clothes or something made of material like cloth, let's see. It's a very specific kind of thing. Now they're talking about a blanket. So this is a blanket. Maybe you would keep this around you to if you didn't have a coat, you could use a blanket to keep warm if you go outside. And you see this blanket around the edge, it has all of this. This is a fringe. Fringe means the edge, the outer part, the outside. And all of these blankets have fringe. These are all fringe blankets. But you could have, in the 80s, I remember in the 80s, there was I hated this, but it was very popular in the 80s to wear clothes like this, to have coats like this. This is a fringe jacket. So fringe, when you're talking about clothes or cloth or blankets, it has this very special meaning. Faribor says like a cowboy. Yeah, like a cowboy. So he tugged at the fringe of the woman's blanket. So the woman is wearing the blanket to keep warm instead of a coat because they're kind of primitive. But that's why she's wearing a blanket. So this is one of the women beating his mother. He was crying because the red marks of the whip on his back still hurt so terribly. But he was also crying because people were so beastly and unfair, and because he was only a little boy and couldn't do anything against them. Linda was crying too. She was grown up, but she wasn't big enough to fight against 3 of them. It wasn't fair for her either. Why did they want to hurt you, Linda? Remember, Linda's his mother, but she grew up in this other society where they don't really have mothers, so she never made him call her Mom. He just calls her by her first name. I don't know. How should I know? It was difficult to hear what she said because she was lying on her stomach and her face was in the pillow. They say those men are their men, she went on, and she did not seem to be talking to him at all. She seemed to be talking with someone inside herself, a long talk which she didn't understand. And in the end, she started crying louder than ever. Oh, don't cry, Linda, don't cry. He pressed himself against her. He put his arm round her neck. Linda cried out, "Oh, be careful, my shoulder, oh." She pushed him away hard. His head banged against the wall. "Little idiot," she shouted. And then suddenly she began to slap him. Slap. "Linda," he cried out. "Oh, Mother, don't." "I'm not your mother. I won't be your mother." "But Linda, oh." She slapped him on the cheek. Turned into a savage," she shouted, "having young ones like an animal. If it hadn't been for you, I might have gone to the inspector. I might have got away. But not with a baby. That would have been too shameful." He saw that she was going to hit him again and lifted his arm to guard his face. "Oh, don't, Linda. Please don't. Little beast." She pulled down his arm. She pulled down his arm. His face was uncovered. "Don't, Linda." He shut his eyes, expecting the blow. But she didn't hit him. After a little time, he opened his eyes again and saw that she was looking at him. He tried to smile at her, and suddenly she put her arms around him and kissed him again and again. Sometimes, for several days, Linda didn't get up at all. She lay in bed and was sad, or else she drank the stuff that Pope brought, and laughed a great deal, and went to sleep. Sometimes she was sick. Often she forgot to wash him. And there was nothing to eat except cold tortillas. He remembered the first time she found those little animals in his hair, and how she screamed and screamed. The happiest times were when she told him about the other place. And you really can go flying whenever you like. Whenever you like? Whenever you like. And she would tell him about the lovely music that came out of a box, and all the nice games you could play, and the delicious things to eat and drink, and the light that came when you pressed a little thing in the wall, and the pictures that you could hear and feel and smell, as well as see, and another box for making nice smells, and the pink and green and blue and silver houses as high as mountains. And everybody happy, and no one ever sad or angry at everyone belonging to everyone else. And the boxes where you could see and hear what was happening on the other side of the world. And babies in lovely, clean bottles. So that's babies because they grow the babies in bottles. They don't have the babies in their bodies anymore. So babies in lovely, clean bottles. Everything so clean, and no nasty smells, no dirt at all, and people never lonely, but living together and being so jolly and happy, like the summer dances here in Malpais. But much happier, and the happiness being there every day. Every day. He listened by the hour. And sometimes when he and the other children were tired with too much playing, one of the old men of the pueblo would talk to them in those other words of the great transformer of the world, and the longest fight between right hand and left hand, between wet and dry, of Awona Willona, who made a great fog by thinking in the night. Hopefully, if you're worried that you don't understand any of this, don't worry, because I don't understand what they're talking about either. But I guess they're explaining their religion or their spiritual beliefs. So sometimes an old man would tell children stories about their religious or spiritual beliefs. Let's see. Who made a great fog by thinking in the night, and then made the whole world out of the fog of Earth Mother and Sky Father, of Ahayuta and Marcelema, the twins of war and chance, of Jesus and Pukong of Mary, and Etzanatlalchi. I have no idea. The woman who makes herself young again, of the black stone of Laguna, and the great eagle, and Our Lady of Acoma. Strange stories, all the more wonderful to him, for being told in other words and not so fully understood. Lying in bed, he would think of heaven, and London, and Our Lady of Acoma, and the rows and rows of babies in clean bottles, and Jesus flying up, and Linda flying up, and the great director of the world hatcheries, and Awona Willona. Lots of men came to see Linda. The boys began to point their finger at him. In the strange other words, they said that Linda was bad. They called her names he did not understand, but he knew that they were bad names, and one day sang a song about her. Again and again he threw stones at them. They threw back. A sharp stone cut his cheek. The blood would stop. He was covered with blood. Linda taught him to read with a piece of charcoal. She drew pictures on the wall, an animal sitting down, a baby inside a bottle. Then she wrote letters. The cat is on the mat. The tot is in the pot. He learned quickly and easily. When he knew how to read all the words that she wrote on the wall, Linda opened her big wooden box and pulled out from under those funny little red trousers she never wore a thin little book. He had often seen it before. When you're bigger, she said, you can read it. Well, now he was big enough. He was proud. I'm afraid you won't find it very exciting, she said, but it's the only thing I have. She sighed. That's sighing. If only you could see the lovely reading machines we used to have in London. He began reading. The chemical and bacteriological conditioning of the embryo Practical instructions for beta embryo store workers. So it's like an instruction manual on how to grow a baby in a bottle, or part of it anyway. He threw the book on the floor. Beastly, beastly book, he said, and began to cry. The boys still sang their horrible song about Linda. Sometimes, too, they laughed at him for being so ragged. Now, remember, we've had that word before, ragged, but I think it's good to, go back and review the things, some of the words that we've looked at. So let's take a look at what rags are, because that's a pretty useful word, or it could be. Rags are old clothes. Clothes that are very old, and you can't even find a picture of rags. You just see brand names of products and names of movies or something. Okay, here's some rags. So rags are like old pieces of clothes that you can't use for anything anymore. Maybe at one time that was a shirt. Who knows what it was, but now it's a rag. And you could still use it maybe for cleaning or doing something like that, but you can't wear it. Ragged pajamas. Farrah Boris says ragged pajamas. Yes, you could have ragged pajamas, I suppose. Especially if you always wear the same thing at night when you go to sleep. Eventually they'll become ragged. So this is a ragged shirt. So when you say raggedy, this is actually, I remember this from when I was a child. This was a doll called Raggedy Ann. That was a very popular girl's toy in the 70s. I remember Raggedy Ann. Raggedy Ann and Andy. Oh no, all they show though is this product. That's what Google does now. They just show products. They don't show real pictures of anything anymore. Let's see. What if we just say ragged? Google's horrible. Look, all they show are stores and brand names now. You can't find a real picture anymore. Let's see. So this could be ragged. So maybe you would describe like a person who lives in the street as ragged, because probably their clothes look something like this. Or raggedy. That looks ragged. Okay, well I guess you get the idea. So let's reread that. The boys still sang their horrible song about Linda. Sometimes, too, they laughed at him for being so ragged. So you can imagine that he was very dirty and his clothes were in very bad condition. When you call someone ragged, I think the main point is that the clothes you are wearing are in very bad condition. And maybe your hair looks very bad. Very dirty and unorganized. When he tore his clothes, Linda did not know how to mend them. So you see, the other children, if they tore their clothes, their mothers would mend the clothes. Mending is fixing. Mending means fixing clothes. Specifically, it means fixing clothes. So if you look at these pictures, we would say, oh, this person is mending a shirt. This is how you mend something. It's like fixing for clothes. But we use mend for fixing many other things now. So mending a relationship is like fixing a relationship. Or you could usually use mending to talk about relationships, friendships, relationships, any kind of relationship where there was a problem and you want to fix it and make it better. You want to repair it. Also, you can use mending to talk about recovering from an illness. So if you say, I'm on the mend, that means I'm getting better. I was sick, but now I'm getting better. So that's actually a pretty useful word. But here it means, it has the literal meaning of fixing clothes. Farabor says, mend is also used for recompensating. But I haven't seen it. You mean compensate like giving money? Like you should make amend for. Oh, I think what you mean is. Well, let me put this word up here. Make amends. I mean, to me, it sounds like what you're talking about is making amends. But again, that means like fixing a relationship. Sometimes if you're mad at someone because they destroyed something of like your property, if someone destroyed your car, to fix the problem so that you're not angry with them anymore or you don't have bad feelings for them, the best way would be to compensate you and buy you a new car. Otherwise, you'll always have bad feelings for them. So making amends means fixing a relationship, just like we were talking about. A different way of saying fixing a relationship. And that could mean compensation if the problem is it's for some reason you lost money because of the other person. Then in making amends, the best way would be to give you money. But if I call you a bad word, if I say, Faraboras, you're stupid, well, I don't think if I give you money that would repair things. So the only way I could make amends is say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Can you please forgive me? I was just in a bad mood when I said that. So, sometimes making amends could be compensation. It could be money compensation. But only if you lost something, some kind of money or value because of me. But in other ways, that would be insulting if I said, you're stupid. And then I said, I'm sorry, here's $10. Can you forgive me now? That would be insulting, actually, if I gave you money in that situation. Okay, but here we're just talking about fixing clothes, which is mending. When he tore his clothes, Linda did not know how to mend them. She didn't know how to fix them. In the other place, she told him, people threw away clothes with holes in them and got new ones. Rags, rags. We already saw pictures of rags. The boys used to shout at him. So the boys used to call him Rags because his clothes were in very bad condition. They looked like rags. But I can read, he said to himself, and they can't. They don't even know what reading is. It was fairly easy if he thought hard enough about reading to pretend that he didn't mind when they made fun of him. He asked Linda to give him the book again. Hari says hello. Hello, Hari. Thanks for joining us. The more the boys pointed and sang, the harder he read. Soon he could read all the words quite well, even the longest. But what did they mean? He asked Linda. But even when she could answer, it didn't seem to make it very clear, and generally she couldn't answer at all. What are chemicals? He would ask. Oh, stuff like magnesium salts and alcohol for keeping the deltas and epsilons small and backward, and calcium carbonate for bones, and all that sort of thing. But how do you make chemicals, Linda? Where do they come from? Well, I don't know. You get them out of bottles, and when the bottles are empty, you send them to the chemical store for more. Oh wow, that's how people live today. Where does corn come from? I don't know. You get it at the store. It's the chemical store people who make them, I suppose, or else they send them to the factory. I don't know. I never did any chemistry. My job was always with the embryos. It was the same with everything else he had asked about. Linda never seemed to know. The old men of the Pueblo had much more definite answers. The seed of men and all creatures, the seed of the sun, the seed of the earth, the seed of the sky, Awona Wallona, made them all out of the fog of increase. And now the world had 4 wombs, and laid the seeds in the lowest of the 4 wombs, and then gradually the seeds began to grow. One day John calculated that it must have been soon after his 12th birthday he came home and found a book that he had never seen before lying on the floor in the bedroom. It was a thick book and looked very old. The binding had been eaten by mice. Binding, bind is when things come together. When you force things to come together, you bind them so that they stay together. So, just so you know, it's actually a pretty useful word. Bind, bound. You see that quite a bit with many different things. But when you're talking about a book, the binding is this part where all of the pages come together. That's the book binding. This is the binding right here. That's where you force all of the paper to come together. He came home and found a book that he had never seen before lying in the bedroom. It was a thick book, looked very old. The binding had been eaten by mice. So that must mean that you have to be very careful turning the pages, because probably if you turn the page, then the page will fall away from the book because there's nothing holding it together anymore. The mice ate it. The binding had been eaten by the mice, and some of its pages were loose and crumpled. Crumpled paper. This is crumpled. Oops. This is crumpled. When it looks like this. So you could have crumpled clothes. If you have very ragged clothes, you could have crumpled clothes. This is crumpled paper. So you have smooth paper. That's not very smooth. And crumpled paper. Fast Cars is saying, what book do you recommend that doesn't use old fancy words to read? I mean, a modern book so I can reach C1 or C2. I'm really enjoying all this kind of video. Well, Fast Cars, there aren't too many fancy words. Sometimes there are fancy words here. But I think that, especially if you're trying to reach C1 or C2, this is the kind of book to do it. Because then you also want to know words that aren't very common, but words that you should probably know. And yes, there are some fancy words in this book, but I think there are some fancy words in a lot of books. Actually, several years ago, I had a student who had a young boy. She had a son. I guess maybe he was 5 or 6. And she said, I would like to read to him Harry Potter. So I said, okay, well, why don't we... I hate Harry Potter, by the way. But I said, why don't we try to... I know maybe I've just made everybody angry by saying that, but I really do. But I said, let's try to read Harry Potter. And I thought it would be easy, but actually it turns out it was extremely difficult because the book is written for children. It uses a lot of very unnecessary language because it's trying to, I guess, make a picture in your head. So they use a lot of really weird words to create a fancy picture in your head. So I would say that reading this is easier than reading a book like Harry Potter because this is more direct language. It's written for adults and it doesn't use too many unnecessary words. Yes, there are some fancy words, but if you're trying to reach C1 or C2, then you better know a lot of fancy words. Okay, so let's see. Let's keep going with this. But that's true, though. I mean, I was very surprised. We only read like the first page of Harry Potter and then said, "Oh no, this is way too complicated, way too unnecessary." But here you learn some interesting words, some fancy words, but it's more direct. So I would not recommend reading a children's book. By children's book, I mean maybe written for someone between the ages of 8 and 15, because those books tend to use a lot of crazy words in them that you really, it's just too complicated. You have to stop every one or two words and look in a dictionary. Okay, so it was a thick book and looked very old. The binding had been eaten by the mice. Some of its pages were loose and crumpled. He picked it up and looked at the title page with the book. It was called The Complete Works of William Shakespeare. Linda was lying on the bed, sipping that horrible stinking mezcal out of a cup. Pope brought it, she said. Her voice was thick and, remember, hoarse. Hoarse is when you talk like this. Maybe from smoking too many cigarettes. People who smoke too many cigarettes talk like this. Or also people who are recovering from a cold. Or people who have been screaming a lot. Her voice was hoarse. Like somebody else's voice. It was lying in one of the chests of Antelope Kiva. It's supposed to have been there for hundreds of years. I expect it's true, because I looked at it and it seemed to be full of nonsense. Uncivilized. Still, it'll be good enough for you to practice your reading on. She took a last sip and set a cup. So she's calling Shakespeare uncivilized. Down on the floor in the bed and turned over to her side. Hiccuped once or twice and went to sleep. He opened the book and at random. Nay, but to live in the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, stewed in corruption, honeying and making love over the nasty sty. Okay, now that is fancy language. Don't ask me to explain it. I don't even understand half of it, but that's Shakespeare for you. The strange words rolled through his mind, rumbled like talking thunder, like the drums at the summer dances, if the drums could have spoken, like the men singing the corn song. Beautiful, beautiful, so that you cried, like an old Mitsima saying magic over his feathers, and his carved sticks, and his bits of bone and stone. Kiatla, Silu, Siloque, Kiai, I guess that must be their native language. But better than Mitsima's magic because it meant more, because it talked to him, talked wonderfully, and only half understandably. A terrible, beautiful magic about Linda lying there and snoring. Snoring is with the empty cup on the floor beside the bed. But about Linda and Pope and this is getting confusing. Let me read that again. A terrible, beautiful magic about Linda. So about Linda means maybe around Linda. So it doesn't mean about her, like about her story, but it means sometimes you could use about, the preposition about, to mean around or near. Like he walked about town. That means he walked around town. So if you say there's a magic about Linda or there's a magic about someone, that means there seems to be a magic around them. A terrible, beautiful magic about Linda lying there snoring with an empty cup on the floor beside the bed, about Linda and Pope. He hated Pope more and more. A man can smile and be a villain, remorseless. If you're remorseless, that means that you do bad things and you don't feel bad about it. You don't feel sorry that you did something bad. So when you feel remorse, you feel bad that you did something. But if you're remorseless, that means you do bad things, but you don't feel bad. It doesn't make you feel sorry. Remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, kindless villain. What did the words exactly mean? He only half knew. But their magic was strong and went on rumbling in his head. And somehow it was though he had never really hated Pope before, never really hated him because he had never been able to say how much he hated him. But now he had these words like drums and singing and magic, these words and the strange story out of which they were taken. He couldn't make head or tail of it. Now that's an expression. That's a very common expression in English too. If you can't make heads or tails of something, it means it's something you cannot understand. Actually, I think I want to make a note of that. Can't make heads or tails of something. That means I can't understand it. I don't understand it in any way. It's impossible for me to understand. Faribor says remorseless is like shameless. I think the difference is there's a difference between remorse and shame. Shame is what you feel when you've done something bad and people know about it. So it's like embarrassment. So you want to hide your face because you did something bad and people saw you. But remorse is when you do something bad and you regret that you did it. Like, why did I do that? What a horrible person I am. So I think shame, when you say that something is shameful, it's, you did something. If other people saw what you did, you would feel embarrassed about it. I think the focus is different. Shame is about embarrassment, about people knowing what you did and you feeling bad that other people know it. And remorse is more about your conscience. Some people don't have a conscience, so they do something bad and they don't care. They don't feel bad about it. They're a little bit different, but I could see why you would confuse the two words. Oh, we've got Still Waters here. Hi, Still Waters. How are you doing today? Okay, let's see. These words and the strange, strange story out of which they were taken, he could make head or tail of it. He couldn't make head or tail of it. That means he couldn't understand anything about it. It was impossible to understand. And that's a pretty common phrase. But it was wonderful, wonderful all the same. They gave him a reason for hating Pope, and they made his hatred more real. They even made Pope himself more real. One day when he came from playing, the door of the inner room was open, and he saw them lying on the floor in the bed, lying together on the bed, asleep. White Linda and Pope almost black beside her, with one arm under her shoulders and the other dark hand on her breast, and one of the plaits of his long hair lying across the throat like a black snake trying to strangle her. Pope's gourd and a cup were standing on the floor near the bed, and Linda was snoring. His heart seemed to have disappeared and left a hole. He was empty and cold and rather sick and giddy. He leaned against the wall to steady himself, remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, like drums. I think that must be a Shakespeare line, although I'm not sure which Shakespeare line. Like drums, like the men singing for the corn, so him reading this book that he could barely understand, the complete works of Shakespeare, is giving him a bigger vocabulary to express his emotions. And now when he sees, what is his name, Pope with his mother, these are the words that he thinks. remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, like drums, like the men singing for the chord, like magic. The words repeated and repeated themselves in his head. From being cold, he was suddenly hot. His cheeks burnt with the rush of blood. The room swam and darkened before his eyes. He ground his teeth. Grinding your teeth, that's like when you move your teeth against each other. He ground his teeth. I'll kill him. I'll kill him. I'll kill him, he kept saying. And suddenly there were more words. When he is drunk asleep, or in his rage, or in the incestuous pleasure of his bed. So he's learning to express himself through lines from Shakespeare's writings. The magic was on his side. The magic explained and gave orders. He stepped back into the outer room. When he is drunk asleep. The knife for the meat was lying on the floor near the fireplace. He picked it up and tiptoed to the door again. When he is drunk asleep. When he is drunk asleep. He ran across the room and stabbed. Oh, the blood. Stabbed as Pope heaved out of his sleep. Lifted his hand to stab once more. But found his wrist caught, held, and twisted. Twisted. He couldn't move. He was trapped. And there was Pope's small black eyes, very close, staring into his own. He looked away. There were 2 cuts on Pope's left shoulder. Oh, look at the blood. Linda was crying. Look at the blood. She had never been able to bear the sight of blood. Pope lifted his other hand to strike. He thought. He stiffened to receive the blow, but the hand only took him under the chin and turned his face so that he had to look again into Pope's eyes. For a long time, for hours and hours, and suddenly he couldn't help it. He began to cry. Pope burst out laughing. Go, he said, in the other Indian words. Go, my brave Ahayuta. He ran into the other room to hide his tears. You are 15, said old Mitsima in the Indian words. Now I may teach you to work the clay. Squatting by the river, they worked together. First of all, said Mitsima, taking a lump of wetted clay between his hands, we make a little moon. The old man squeezed the lump into a disk, and then bent up the edges. The moon became a shallow cup. Slowly and unskillfully he imitated the old man's delicate gestures. A moon, a cup, and now a snake. Mitsima rolled out another piece of clay into a long, flexible cylinder, hooped into a circle, and then pressed on it to the rim of the cup. Then another snake, and another, and another. Round by round, Mitsima built up the sides of the pot. It was narrow. It bulged. A bulge is something that sticks out. That's actually a good word. We should probably take a look at that. But I have to be careful because let's see what kind of before I show you the pictures that Google shows me. Yeah. So you can't just type the word bulge and look at pictures because you'll get inappropriate pictures. Let's see, bulging. Bulging. Let's try bulging. Bulging is when something is pushing out. So, let's see if I can find any. I can't really show you pictures because if you type the word bulge, you could get all kinds of different pictures of things pushing out that, I don't know, I can't show you in a YouTube video. Let's try bulging eyes. Okay, normally, you know what normal eyes look like. Well, this is bulging eyes. So the eyes are really pushing out. You can really see that round part. So anytime something round is pushing out and it's very noticeable, this can be a bulge. Probably, you could use that for, what if I say bulging belly? Belly is another word for stomach. And then if you look at this picture, see the person on the right is very skinny, doesn't have anything sticking out, but the person on the left has a bulging belly. Faribor says sticking out. Yeah, it does kind of mean sticking out. Yeah, but usually, when you think of something bulging, it should have this round shape. Usually you want to use that when the shape is round and sticking out. Let's see, what was bulging here? I've lost my place. Round by round, Mitsima built up the sides of the pot. It was narrow, and it bulged. It bulged, and then it narrowed again. So it was narrow at the top, and then it bulged, and then it was narrow again. Towards the neck. Oh, other way. It was narrow, and then it bulged, and then it was narrow again towards the neck. Mitsima squeezed and patted and stroked and scraped, and there at last stood in shape the familiar water pot of Malpais, but creamy white instead of black, and still soft to the touch. The crooked parody of Mitsima's his own stood beside it. A parody is like an imitation. It's used for comedy. Did you ever see a comedy where they make fun of something else? That's a parody. So let's see. What kind of... parody. Oh, I can't find any very good pictures of a parody. I don't know if you've ever seen this. In the 90s, there was a movie called Scary Movie. I don't know if you're familiar with that movie. Maybe you recognize that face. I think that was from the late 90s, Scary Movie. And what they were doing, they were actually making a joke. It was kind of a joke, or by imitating all of the other movies that were supposed to be scary from the 80s or early 90s, even the 70s. And they were kind of laughing at them, making fun of them. So it wasn't supposed to be scary. It was supposed to be funny. And that's a parody. Parodies are usually ridiculous imitations of something to make you laugh. So here the old man is teaching the boy to make a vase, how to make a vase with clay. And of course the old man can make a very nice, beautiful vase. But obviously the little boy, the first time he tries to make the vase, it's going to be horrible. So they're calling his version a parody of the vase that the old man made. So it's something you would laugh at and make fun of. Firebore says, I saw this was up. What's was up? What is that? I don't know. I don't know what that is. Is that a movie or I don't know. Okay, let's see. So the crooked parody. And crooked means not even, not smooth. But let's see if we can, what kind of pictures we get for crooked. Crooked. So for example, this is a crooked house. Okay, so it's not straight, it's not smooth, it's not shaped correctly. That's crooked. What other things do we find when we see crooked? This is a crooked tree. A crooked tree. Because you want a tree to go up and down, and if you see a tree like that, it's shaped in the wrong way. It's not right. So let's see what else. Do we have any other crooked teeth? These are crooked teeth. So you want straight, smooth teeth, but these are crooked teeth. That's a good word to know, crooked. Crooked also means corrupt. So a crooked politician is a corrupt politician, a politician who accepts money and changes rules or breaks a lot of rules. Oh, where did that go? I keep losing my place. Okay, Mitsima squeezed and patted and stroked and scraped, and there at last it stood in the shape, the familiar water pot of Malpais, but creamy white instead of black, and still soft to the touch, the crooked parody. So it wasn't straight, it didn't look nice, and it seemed like a parody. It seemed like something you would point and laugh at, instead of the nice, beautiful vase the old man made. The crooked parody of Mitsima's, his own, stood beside it. Looking at the two pots, he had to laugh. Oh, so I should look for was up. Okay, I'll do that later. I'll look for was up. Oh wait, I'll just do it now. Let's see, what is was up? Was up. Okay, well, this seems like, I don't know what this is. Is this a movie or something? Or I see that they have the scary movie mask, and it looks ridiculous. So this looks like a parody. Maybe it's a parody of a parody. I don't know if this is what you were thinking about, but I see this picture. Okay. But the next one will be better, he said, and began to moisten another piece of clay. To moisten something, moist means a little wet, a little bit wet. So to moisten something, to make something moist, means to make it a little bit wet. Not a lot wet, but a little bit wet. But the next one will be better, he said, and began to moisten another piece of clay. So he put a little bit of water with the clay to make it so that he could work with it. To fashion, to give form, to feel his fingers gaining in skill and power, this gave him an extraordinary pleasure. A, B, C, vitamin D, he sang to himself as he worked, the fats in the liver, the cods in the sea. And Mitsima also sang a song about killing a bear. They worked all day, and all day he was filled with an intense, absorbing happiness. Next winter, said old Mitsima, I will teach you to make a bow. A bow, let's just take a look at that for a minute. A bow is the long thing that you use, like you go like this. The arrow is the weapon. I can't really draw on here, unfortunately. But I guess, do they have the words here? Oh, wait. Maybe we can look at this picture here. Where is it? Okay, you see this picture here? You have two parts. You have on the left, you have the bow, and on the right, you have the arrows. So the bow is the thing that you pull back, and the arrow is the thing that flies forward. A bow and arrow. So the old man says, "Next, I will teach you how to make a bow." "Next winter," said old Mitsima, "I will teach you to make the bow." He stood for a long time outside the house, and at last the ceremonies within were finished. The door opened. They came out. Kothlu came first, his right hand outstretched. Wait, I changed my camera recently, my position. His hand outstretched. That means holding out your hand. Kothlu came first, his right hand outstretched and tightly closed, as though over some precious jewel. He clenched. Clenching is when you do this very, very tight. Very tight. When you clench something, you hold it very, very tight. He clenched the hand similarly outstretched. Her clenched hand similarly outstretched. Kiakime followed. They walked in silence, and in silence, behind them came the brothers and sisters and cousins and all the troop of old people. They walked down out of the pueblo across the mesa. At the edge of the cliff, they halted. Halting means stopping. Facing the early morning sun, Kothlu opened his hand. A pinch of cornmeal lay white in his palm. He breathed on it, murmured a few words, and then threw it, a handful of white dust, towards the sun. Kiakime did the same. Then Kiakime's father stepped forward, and holding up a feathered prayer stick, made a long prayer, and then threw the stick after the cornmeal. "It finished," said old Mitsima in a loud voice. "They are married." "Well," said Linda, as they turned away, "all I can say is, it does seem a lot of fuss to make about so little." A fuss means to make a big show or make a big production about something. So these two people just got married. These two young people just got married. And Linda is thinking, oh, that's such a big show. Why make such a big thing of it? Why make such a fuss? It does seem a big fuss to make about so little. In civilized countries, when a boy wants to have a girl, he just... "But where are you going, John?" He paid no attention to her calling, but ran on away anywhere to be by himself. It finished. Old Mitsima's words repeated themselves in his mind. Finished, finished in silence. And from a long way off, but violently, desperately, hopelessly, he had loved Kiakime, and now it was finished. He was 16. At full moon, in the Antelope Kiva, secrets would be told. Secrets would be done and born. They would go down. Boys into the Kiva, came out again men. The boys were all afraid, at the same time impatient. And at last it was the day. The sun went down, the moon rose. He went with the others. Men were standing, dark, at the entrance to the Kiva. The ladder went down into the red, lighted depths. Already the leading boys had begun to climb down. Suddenly, one of the men stepped forward, caught him by the arm, and pulled him out of the ranks. He broke free and dodged back into the place among the others. So they're going to do this ritual. They're 15 years old, and they're going to do this ritual underground to become men. And so there's a line of boys who are 15, and they're all going down into the secret place to do the secret ritual. But one of the men tried to grab, what was his name, John? I'm horrible with names. And he tried to pull him out of the line. Like, he doesn't belong there. But he ran back into the line. He broke free and dodged back into his place among the others. This time the man struck him, pulled his hair. "Not for you. white hair. Not for the son of the she-dog, said one of the other men. The boys laughed. Go. And as he still hovered on the fringes of the group, so remember we had that word fringes earlier, it means edge. So to be on the fringe of a group means to be on the side of the group, not in the group, but off to the side. To be on the fringe of a city, maybe you live on the fringe of a city. That means you live on the edges of the city. So if you live on the fringes of society, that usually means that you don't practice the normal traditions of the society where you live. You live on the side. You live a little bit apart. Maybe you live in the society, but you don't participate in it the same way. So sometimes you say, for example, maybe people living in the street people live on the fringes of society. They live in the society, but they don't participate fully in it, really. Not in the same way. But here it just means, how did they use fringe here? I guess fringe is our word of the day. Firebore says edge. Yeah, it does mean edge, but when you say fringe, you usually use fringe in all of these cases that I just pointed out to you. It sounds better. You could say edge and people will understand you, but always in this context, people use the word fringe. But here it's literal. Well, let's read that again. So, not for you, white hair, not for the son of the she-dog, said one of the other men. The boys laughed. Go! And as he still hovered on the fringes of the group, so this literally means that he's not together with the other people. He's off to the side a little bit. The men shouted again. One of them bent down and took a stone and threw it. Go, go, go! There was a shower of stones, bleeding. He ran away into the darkness. From the red-lit kiva came the noise of singing. The last boys had climbed down the ladder, and he was all alone. Fast Cars says hovered on the fringes maybe means near the edge. Yes, it does mean, it means on the edge. So you can picture a group of people and they all seem together and he's just a little bit away. Kind of close, but not with them. He's noticeably not with them. He's on the fringes. All alone outside the pueblo, on that bare plain of the mesa, the rock was like bleached bones in the moonlight. Down in the valley, the coyotes were howling at the moon. So remember, howling is what dogs do. Oh, that's howling. The bruises hurt him. The cuts were still bleeding. But it was not for the pain that he sobbed. Sobbing is crying, like, it's like loud vocal crying. So it was not for the pain that he sobbed. It was because he was all alone. Because he had been driven out, alone into the skeleton world of rocks and moonlight. At the edge of the precipice, he sat down. The moon was behind him. He looked down into the black shadow of the mesa, into the black shadow of death. He had only to take one step, one little jump. He held out his right hand in the moonlight. From the cut on his wrist, the blood was still oozing. Every few seconds a drop fell, almost colorless in the dead light. Drop, drop, drop. Tomorrow, tomorrow, and tomorrow. He had discovered time and death and God. Alone, always alone, the young man was saying. The words awoke a plaintive echo in Bernard's mind. Alone. So am I, he said, on a gush of... What is this word? Confidingness. Okay. To confide means to tell a secret, to share a secret. So you could say two things. You can say, can I tell you a secret? That would be the normal way of asking, talking to someone in a conversation. But if you were a more formal person, or if you were in a more formal situation, you might say, "Can I confide in you?" You could use the word confidant to mean friend. That means a person with whom I share secrets. He is my confidant. That means we're very close. I tell him secrets. I tell him things I don't tell other people. That's a confidant. And I've never seen confide being used like this, confidingness. But that just means a moment where he shares a secret. So John is saying, "Oh, I'm all alone. I'm all alone." And Bernard says, "So am I." He said on a gush of confidingness, like in a moment. A gush is like a sudden burst, a sudden explosion. Wait, let's look at this word gush for a minute. It's always about liquid. So here's a gush of water. It's just like a sudden explosion of water. There used to be a gum, a type of gum called Gush. And I'm surprised, wait, let's see. I'm surprised we can't find a picture of that. It used to be very popular when I was a kid, but then I guess that was a very long time ago, so maybe that doesn't exist anymore. But, have you ever seen that kind of gum for children where, like, you put it in your mouth, but there's liquid in the middle of the gum? So if you bite down on the gum, suddenly you get an explosion of, what is this? Oh, it's some kind of drug. But they probably still have that type of gum for children. You chew on it, and then there's like an explosion of liquid inside. Because that's kind of fun for kids. There used to be a gum called Gushers. Oh wait, maybe it's Gushers and not Gush. Yeah. So this candy, you can tell by the name what it does. It's hard on the outside, but then when you get to the middle, there's an explosion of liquid. That's what gushing really means. It's mostly used to talk about liquid. Here it's used a little bit different. It just kind of means explosion. A gush of confidingness. So a sudden explosion of sharing a secret you normally wouldn't tell. Or sharing something you normally wouldn't tell. Are you? John looks surprised. I thought in the other place, Linda always said that nobody was ever alone there. Bernard blushed uncomfortably. Yes, you see, he said, mumbling with averted eyes. Remember, avert means that you're avoiding looking at something. So that boy is not looking at him when he's talking. You see, he said, mumbling with averted eyes, I'm rather different from most people, I suppose, if one happens to be decanted different. Yes, that's just it, the young man nodded. If one's different, one's bound to be lonely. They're beastly to one. Do you know that they shut me out of absolutely everything? When the other boys were sent out to spend the night in the mountains, when they have to dream, when you have to dream which your sacred animal is, they wouldn't let me go with the others. They wouldn't tell me any of these secrets. I did it by myself, though, he added. Didn't eat anything for 5 days, and went out one night alone into those mountains there, he pointed. Patronizingly, Bernard smiled. And did you dream of anything, he asked. The other nodded. But I mustn't tell you what. He was silent for a little, and then in a low voice, Once, he went on, I did something that none of the others did. I stood against a rock in the middle of the day in summer with my arms out like Jesus on the cross. What on earth for? I wanted to know what it was like being crucified, hanging there in the sun. But why? Well, he hesitated because I felt I ought to, if Jesus could stand it, and then if one had done something wrong, Besides, I was unhappy. That was another reason. It seems a funny way of curing your unhappiness, said Bernard, but on second thought, he decided there was, after all, some sense in it. Better than taking soma. I fainted after a time, said the young man, fell down on my face. Do you see the mark where I cut myself? He lifted the thick yellow hair from his forehead. The scar showed paled and puckered in the moonlight. Puckered, now that's kind of an interesting word, but I have to take a 1 minute break, okay? So I'm sorry, but I will be back in just 1 minute. Where's my... I want to change my screen. Oh, what happened? Oh, here it is. Okay. So I'll just be back in 1 second. All right, we're back. Sorry about that. Okay, I have to put on my music too. Where's my music? Here we go. All right, let's keep reading. Bernard looked, and then quickly, with a little... Oh, wait, I wanted to look at the word pucker. Pucker, it's a pretty interesting word. I'm sure it's a word you probably don't know. But when something puckers, it becomes very tense and very tight. So this is a puckered face. Imagine the face that you make if you eat a lemon. Pucker. That's puckering. Things get pulled together. That's puckering. So when you see pucker, you're usually talking about lemons or something sour that makes your face go into this. It's also when if you tell someone pucker up, that means make your lips into a kiss. That means like get ready to kiss me, pucker up. And that's why you see this woman making a kissing face, because you're making your lips very tense and tight. That's puckering, puckered lips. I don't see any other pictures. Mostly you just see pictures of lemons, because lemons are what make you pucker most. But here they're saying that a scar puckered. So I guess you could imagine if you have a scar, when it heals, maybe the skin becomes tight and you can see little lines of tightness where the scar is healing. I think that's how he's using it here. Oh, let's go back and reread where it says pucker. I fainted after a time, said the young man. Fell down on my face. Do you see the mark where I cut myself? He lifted his thick yellow hair from his forehead. This is the forehead. And the scar showed a pale and puckered on his right temple. These are the temples. So here's your forehead, and these are the temples right here. Bernard looked, and then quickly, with a little shudder, remember shudder is, ugh, averted his eyes. His conditioning had made him not so much pitiful as profoundly squeamish. To be squeamish means that it's very difficult for you to see things like blood. For example, if you see blood, you feel very sick. You don't like to see things like blood or injuries or anything like that. You feel very sick. Ugh, that's being squeamish. Bernard looked, and then quickly, with a little shudder, averted his eyes. His conditioning had made him not so much pitiful as profoundly squeamish. The mere suggestion of illness or wounds was to him not only horrifying, but even repulsive and rather disgusting. Like dirt or deformity or old age, hastily he changed the subject. I wonder if you'd like to come back to London with us, he asked, making the first move in a campaign whose strategy he had already been secretly elaborating ever since. In a little house, he had realized with the father of his young savage, let me reread that. I wonder if you'd like to come back to London with us, he asked, making his first move in a campaign whose strategy he had been secretly elaborating ever since in the little house he had realized who the father of this young savage must be. So if you saw earlier in the story, Bernard realized that this boy, the father of this boy, was his boss. Because many years ago, right before Bernard went to this savage reservation, his boss told him a story. Oh, I went there once with this girl, and that girl is Linda. And I went with a girl, and somehow she got lost, and I had no choice but to return without her. I figured she probably died. But she didn't die. She was pregnant with his child, and she had his child on this savage reservation. And so ever since Bernard realized this, he thought, I'm going to try to take this boy back to London with me. And now he's suggesting it to the boy. Would you like that? The young man's face lit up. Do you really mean it? Of course, I can get the permission, that is. If I can get the permission, that is. Linda too? Well, he hesitated doubtfully. That revolting creature? Revolting means like disgusting. No, it was impossible. Unless it suddenly occurred to Bernard that her very revoltingness might prove an enormous asset. But of course, he cried, making up for his first hesitations with an excess of noisy cordiality. The young man drew a deep breath. To think it should be coming true. What I've dreamt of all my life. Do you remember what Miranda says? Who's Miranda? But the young man had evidently not heard the question. Oh, wonder, he was saying, and his eyes shone, his face was brightly flushed. How many goodly creatures are there here? How beauteous mankind is. The flush suddenly deepened. He was thinking of Lenina, of an angel in bottle green, viscose, lustrous, with youth and skin, food, plump. Remember, plump, it kind of means like juicy, but really plump means juicy. And that's when you're looking for fruit, you always want plump fruit. You want to, so if you go to the market to buy maybe a peach or, I don't know, an apple or Grapes, you want them to be plump. You want them to be fat with juice. But you can also use plump to mean, I don't know if you know the word chubby. You have fat, and then you have something that's not fat but not skinny, and that's chubby. You can also use plump to describe someone. Well, don't do it. People will get offended. But sometimes you can use the word plump, meaning chubby or kind of fat, a little bit fat, plump. It's kind of a cute way of calling someone fat. But don't do it. I'm not telling you to use that word in that way. Where did we see that? How many goodly creatures there are! How beauteous mankind is! The flush suddenly deepened. He was thinking of Lenina, of an angel in bottle green, viscose, lustrous, with youth and skin, food, and skin food. Skin food? Seems like there should be a comma there. Plump, benevolently smiling, his voice faltered. "Oh, brave new world," he began, and then suddenly interrupted himself. The blood had left his cheeks. He was as pale as paper. "Are you married to her?" he asked. "Am I what?" "Married. You know, forever, they say. Forever, in the Indian words. It can't be broken." "Ford, no!" Bernard couldn't help laughing. John also laughed, but for another reason. Laughed of pure joy. So he must really... oh yeah, he did. Remember in the earlier chapter, it was obvious that he felt a very strong attraction to Lenina. He was even embarrassed to look at her, and he averted his gaze. "Oh, brave new world," he repeated. "Oh, brave new world, that has such people in it. Let's start at once." "You have a most peculiar way of talking sometimes," said Bernard, staring at the young man in a perplexed astonishment. "And anyhow, hadn't you better wait until you actually see the new world?" "Oh well, okay, well things are getting interesting now. You know, I have to confess, when I read the first 2 chapters of this book, I didn't like it. I'm just reading it because I heard it was an interesting book, and I don't know anything about it really, except that it's similar to 1984 in certain ways. And it is. But I think it's starting to get pretty interesting now, and I kind of like it. So next time, I don't know if it would be tomorrow, because I'm trying to do this at the same time every day, so it's not so confusing to people. But I don't know if I can tomorrow. What do I have tomorrow? I think I might be able to do it tomorrow. It depends on how early I wake up. Because I do this at 7 o'clock in the morning where I am, or 6:30. If I could do it at like 6, maybe. We'll see. So I'll try to, if I don't do it tomorrow, I'll definitely do it the next day. And we will look at Chapter 9 of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. So thank you for everyone who stayed. Thank you for all your questions and comments. That really makes a big difference when you ask questions and make comments. So I always want you to do that when you can. And I will see you next time, okay? Goodbye.